Good day, everybody. Good day. Welcome to the Entheogenic Esquire podcast and YouTube channel. Thank you for being here for our live stream today. I see I have some of my regulars here in the chat. Miss Susan, how you doing? Uh, well, Ellen, how are you doing? I hope some others end up joining us today. So, anyways, today's going to be an extension, obviously, from what we were doing yesterday. Just a quick recap. Based upon my investigation, and really just been preliminary at this point, investigation into the Epstein files, I stumbled upon a 2019 opinion and order from, I believe, the Southern District of Florida. Okay. And so this was two of Epstein's 2007 victims, right? Whenever the quote unquote sweetheart, what I would rather coin illegal deal was struck between the federal government and Epstein in regards to, I think at that time, 34 victims had been identified. And so this opinion and order came from a lawsuit which was filed by two of those victims against the DOJ for violating their rights under federal law. And we went over yesterday what that federal law was. It's the Crime Victims' Rights Act. They sued the DOJ for violating that act, for not appropriately, more or less keeping them in the loop or notifying them about their dealings with Epstein and Epstein's attorneys in trying to strike a deal for the non-prosecution of both Epstein and his quote unquote potential co-conspirators. So that's really what we've been covering. And so yesterday, and just so we know, the court did find, and we will get into that tomorrow, the court did find that indeed the DOJ had violated these people's rights under the act there, the Crime Victims Act. But yesterday we really honed in on the email exchange and correspondence. And remember, y'all, this was an opinion, an order in federal court where the judge made very specific factual findings. One that was mostly of interest to us yesterday, right, is that the judge made affirmative factual findings that indeed Epstein had co-conspirators that he was working with, right? And obviously that reflects rather poorly upon the testimony given by, specifically Kash Patel in front of Congress, where under oath he alleged that there was no credible evidence to suggest that Epstein had trafficked victims to anyone other than himself, right? And so when we look, and I mean, when I peeled back and saw this one pleading where like the first, I think it was in the first paragraph or two, the judge like concluded this, reflecting back on what Kash Patel said, you're like, clearly perjury. Now, whether we'll see accountability for that, remains to be seen. I think I mentioned yesterday, Dick Durbin had made comments during one of the committee hearings to Pam Bondi that, she would pay for, what we're obviously seeing is, in my opinion, intentional misconduct, obfuscation, complete heartlessness for these victims, and going the extra mile, as we saw yesterday, to try to accommodate elite billionaire PDF file traffickers. Okay. So what today, it's going to kind of be the same thing. I'm going to be talking, not as reading as much today. I'm going to be talking more just generally about the correspondence back and forth. But today, this part of the factual opinion, what we're going to be looking at is the intentional obfuscation and lack of legal notice as required by law to the victims, both during the pendency of why they're negotiating this non-prosecution agreement with Epstein and even afterwards, right? And as I said yesterday, and what we'll see today is that the intention was that they would keep this non-prosecution agreement away from these victims long enough to where the state court plea bargain could go through and Jeffrey Epstein could be sentenced without the judge or the court really understanding the full nature and breadth of what he had done. And by no means did they want any of the victims showing up at that sentencing hearing and contesting to the essentially slap on the wrist that Mr. Epstein received in the state court, which also formed the basis of the non-prosecution agreement at the federal level, right? And so today, again, what we're going to be looking at, the federal government, the DOJ, went through pretty extreme lengths to accommodate this process, pretty much at the instruction of Jeffrey Epstein's attorneys not to notify these witnesses. So that way there would be no way on God's green earth that they could show up and pardon my language, fucked this up for Jeffrey Epstein because it was very important that he not spend too much time in prison. So that's essentially what it was. Before we jump in, though, and pardon my language, y'all see the fucking Super Bowl debacle that went on last night? I'm so happy that I did not witness any of that. I was not aware of all this divisive bullshit that we are being put through till this morning. But it's pretty amazing that in America we're in such a state now where we can't even have a common sporting event where the powers be, the political powers that be on both sides of the aisle make this as fucking divisive as possible, right? And so today I wake up and everyone wants to not do good to one another, right? Based upon whose halftime show that you watched or liked. It's completely ridiculous. This channel is not that. Don't come here if you expect me to be indulging on either side of that debate. I think it's all pretty fucking senseless. I will say I think that the NFL could have tried to pick a more agreeable, performer. I'm not going to stick it all on them, and then breaking off and doing your own halftime. Can you see the divisiveness there? Can you see the divisiveness? That is all by design, and it's done by some magicians, for real magicians that are, wanting to make things appear and seem not as they are. All right. So that way we stay focused on this while they're over here doing this. Okay. And, just by way of example, this stuff with Epstein, how did all this stuff get done? Well, intentional obfuscation. Okay. Intentional obfuscation by both the Department of Justice and the defense attorneys. And hey, I mean, I wouldn't think it'd be a far stretch to think that the media also probably preemptively stepped back as well from reporting these things for obvious reasons. Right. So, anyways, I hate to even make that announcement or point it out, but it just, by way of example, what the condition of our country is in right now. Okay. So today let's go through this and I'll say this. Today, just realize that what we're going to be talking about and discussing, like yesterday, is what happens whenever we remain divided, whenever our eyes are off the ball. These are the things that happen behind closed doors. Okay, these back, smoke-filled rooms with the guy behind the curtain, whatever you want to say. Okay, so let today be an example of what's at stake when we choose to focus on those things that are so divisive and fail to unite us. Okay. All right, so let's jump right in. So again, yesterday we were covering the various email exchanges and letters and correspondence going back and forth between the Department of Justice, the state attorney's office, and Epstein's counsel, remember, and how there was an extensive effort on the part of the DOJ in trying to make sure that whatever crimes were going to be included in this non-prosecution agreement or at the state level were minimal. So despite knowing that there were over 34 victims and that this happened pretty much all over the world, facts that otherwise would have had the DOJ demanding that, Epstein be put underneath the prison, somehow, in this case, it is completely switched. And there is now an active effort to try to keep Epstein out of jail. Okay. So again, and we can sit here and speculate all day. What was certainly, we got to figure something was going on behind the scenes because this behavior is so irregular, especially on the behalf of federal prosecutors, that there's just no other way to explain it other than these people were either under extreme duress or there was some very, very corrupt things going on. Well, those were happening anyways, right? But to the extent and what effect it had on the attorneys who actually woke up that morning each of these days and actually went and did this and were able to look at themselves in the mirror and still go to sleep that night. Well, I guess that's again for us to speculate about. Okay. So anyways, jumping right in. So today we're going to be covering how did they obfuscate this non-prosecution agreement from the victims for long enough so that they could actually get this pushed through at the state court. So that way, by the time the victims were notified, there was absolutely nothing they could do about, trying to get more criminal prosecution brought upon Epstein. Okay. So let's jump right in. here we go. September 24th, 2007, right? The DOJ and Epstein. Okay, so September 24th is when, and this is 2007, is when they actually reached an agreement on the non-prosecution. Okay. It covered approximately 34 victims that it identified. And it also said that to the extent, and I'm going to go dig the actual agreement up, it just, not that it was completely relevant to this discussion, but now that we have the context after this episode of how it was created, it'll really be more meaningful when we go and look at the actual terms of that non-prosecution agreement. Anyways, so it identified 34 victims and said that to the extent that Epstein complied with the non-prosecution agreement, it would also cover potential co-conspirators. Okay. So that is where this whole thing with these co-conspirators, Kash Patel, and so with that being said, obviously the question by Justice Kennedy was aiming at what we're talking about today, these co-conspirators. Obviously, the court found that there was, the DOJ had found that there was. And so again, Kash Patel's statement that there were not is not supported by the actual Epstein files. I don't think that if he's ever brought up on that he's going to be able to defend himself and wiggle out of that one. Just my opinion. One other thing that was really, and I can't wait to really dig into it, but apparently this non-prosecution agreement also limited, because within it, okay, they set up this kind of paradigm or rubric whereby the victims, while they wouldn't see any criminal justice for Epstein, it did try to set them up in a way to get civil liability damages. But even then, as we'll see, they were limiting punitive damages and such, right? Against a billionaire, against an alleged billionaire at the time, right? So they were, yeah, you can sue Epstein, but not too much. He can get off scot-free on the criminal charges, and when it gets to civil, we're going to give you something, but not too much. Not too much. You don't have too much dignity here with the DOJ. And so when I'm reading this opinion too, the quote unquote potential co-conspirators, there were apparently some named in the actual opinion. They were redacted in this version of the Epstein files. I am very curious to go look this up on Pacer, which I will try to make a point to do today, and see if in the original filing on Pacer, which should still be there, whether those co-conspirators are also redacted in the original opinion and order on Pacer. So I'll let y'all know. The NPA was agreed. So they agreed, and I touched a little bit on this yesterday, is that they agreed that this non-prosecution agreement, not only would it not be made part of the public record, but the DOJ actually agreed that in the event that some FOIA request or any other type of compulsory court process was going to require them to release this agreement, they would absolutely notify Epstein of that disclosure. And, so that way he'd have a chance to either contest or do something to try to prevent us, the public, the victims, from figuring out what all this was about. Okay. From the time the FBI began its investigation until the non-prosecution agreement was signed in September of 2007, the DOJ or the FBI never notified the victims about the non-prosecution agreement, or even mention that such an agreement will. The whole time the victims are aware that the federal investigation is going on. As you could imagine, they're probably very hopeful, and for their part, they're willing to come to court, I would imagine, at least some of them, and testify personally against Epstein and these co-conspirators. And so in their mind, I'm sure they're thinking, okay, well, this should be pretty easy, straightforward, because we're willing to come and testify on the stand against him. And so, the whole time they're sitting there just hoping and waiting that the federal prosecution is going to come through, because we all know that generally when the federal government prosecutes somebody, just so you know, and this also goes to why this is insane the way that they were doing this, because the federal government, the DOJ, has like a 97% conviction rate or something like that. So it's like very, very high, and federal sentences tend to also be high. And you don't get probation parole too quite often in that federal system. So obviously, I'm sure that the victims were during this time very, very hopeful that the Department of Justice, FBI, these other agencies were going to actually do their job, and maybe they'd see some justice. Maybe they'd see some real justice. I'm sure they were very hopeful. It just saddens me in my heart to know what we know now, how this went down. It wasn't until the agreement was signed and the state charges were settled that, Epstein went and did his plea. Judge obviously would have had to approve that. And again, that's why they were not wanting these victims to show up and testify, right? But it wasn't until well after that happened when the victims finally received full notification and understanding of what this non-prosecution agreement was, and for the most part, it's even in its existence. Epstein's counsel was aware, and Judge points this out in the opinion. Epstein's counsel was aware and actually required, made specific request, I would say demands upon the Department of Justice not to release this agreement to the victims until it was agreeable by Epstein's attorneys. And anything before, they were saying, and let me say this, it seems that there was also some type of an early confidentiality agreement that the DOJ signed with Epstein and his attorneys. And that agreement is also some of the impetus when I'm looking at these emails that Epstein's attorney was using to try to block them or prevent them from sending out this notice again. So that way the state thing could go through and they couldn't, pardon my language, fuck that up. There was a concerted effort on both sides to ensure that. And let me say this. The fact that the DOJ allowed Epstein's counsel, to dictate both the timing and the content of the notice that otherwise is required by law to go to these victims, the fact that they were allowing Epstein's attorneys to dictate this in any way, the judge pointed out it's a departure from their normal policy. But I'm going to go ahead and say it's a gross departure from their policy. I mean, it's to me in many ways unfathomable. And I'm seeing a lot of y'all's reactions over the last 2 days to a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's really just unbelievable, right? And especially in light of what has happened since 2007, all those victims, look, I don't think I'd be amiss by saying that some of this could have been prevented very early on had the Department of Justice actually been committed to doing what they were appointed and tasked to do. Okay. So, and I remember yesterday we talked about the email between the state prosecutor and the federal prosecutor where they were intentionally omitting information in front of the state judge, specifically with regards to the nature and breadth of Epstein's crimes. Again, with the intention that the judge not know that, because that's the person who has the final say or authority over whether a plea bargain is going to go through or not. So again, there was intentional obfuscation of the trial court as a means to, again, get this pushed through, because just in the realm of rational human beings, you don't have to be an attorney to understand that what's happening here and this sweetheart deal that Epstein get bear no relation to the crimes and the amount of victims that he had. And I would venture to say no decent human being or judge would have approved the state plea bargain that Epstein got had they known the full breadth and scope of what was known to the DOJ and the state at that time. To that end, the Department of Justice sent an email to Epstein's attorney. And the reason why I'm reading it, because it's just a direct example of other obfuscation from other officials. So this attorney that's working on the case for the DOJ admits, what I'm about to read you, admits in this email to Epstein's attorneys that they're even obfuscating this thing from other officials, apparently. And some of it's redacted, so I'm just trying to draw some inferences here. But let me read it. It says, when we reach an agreement about the attorney representative for the girls, and so this is part of the non-prosecution agreement, was that a civil attorney would be set up and paid for by Epstein to represent the girls in seeking civil damages and restitution. And so that's what they're referring here. But they're saying when we reach an agreement about the attorney representative for the girls, we can discuss what I can tell him and the girls about the agreement. I know that I know that promised chief an update. I know that I promised chief an update. So I guess it's kind of like the chief deputy attorney in the DOJ office where they're at. But it says, I promised chief an update when a resolution was achieved. Rolando is calling. I don't know who Rolando is, but it says, but Rolando knows not to tell chief about the money issue, just about what crimes Epstein is pleading guilty to and the amount of time that has been agreed to, which was, again, bare minimum. Rolando is also telling chief not to disclose the outcome to anyone. So again, here's what we see is like various levels of obfuscation between different officials in the DOJ, with some officials knowing this, but not knowing this. But hey, but they're all agreeing to, and here's what's important, is that they're all agreeing to keep it all secret. They're all agreeing to keep it all secret. Okay. Which at the end of the day is one of the worst crimes that's happened here, right? Because this being in the dark, now what's been brought to light is heinous, right? With all the victims and other crimes that were committed after they handled this matter. On September 25th, so this is after, right? After they signed the agreement on September 24th, the Department of Justice sent an email to Epstein's counsel requesting a conference call so that way they can discuss when they're going to notify the victims. Again, the idea that they're bringing in defense counsel, especially to the degree that they are, to determine when and how these victims will be notified, is a gross departure from normal policy and just a gross departure from being a normal, decent human being and understanding that they have a duty to help protect against future criminal activity, right? That's why they have the power to punish people for deterrence. But obviously, with what they're doing here, that duty to deter, or at least attempt to deter, future criminal activity is more or less being thrown to the side. Okay. During the course of the emails, Epstein's attorney demands that the Department of Justice not release this copy of the draft indictment. So remember the draft indictment that we talked about, the 53-page draft indictment? Oh, hell no. Epstein's attorneys, they demanded, do not send that to the victims. Do not send that to the victims, right? Because you might give them an idea of, the full breadth of how vile this human being is, and it might give them courage or the impetus to show up and try to stop what we're doing. We can't do that. We cannot have them stop us giving Epstein the biggest break in history. Okay. So then on October 10th, Epstein's counsel sent an email to the Department of Justice stating, neither federal agents nor anyone from your office should contact the identified individuals, victims, to inform them of the resolution of the case, including appointment of the attorney representative and the settlement process. None of it. That violate the confidentiality agreement. So again, apparently they had a confidentiality agreement. I've never heard of that one. But Mr. Epstein also will have no control. Oh my God, he would have no control over what is communicated to the identified individuals at the most critical stage. What's the most critical stage? Oh, that stage where they might be able to show up and block the block the plea agreement, the sweetheart plea, illegal plea agreement in my mind. Yeah, that's the critical stage. That's why we don't want to notify them. They might F it up. They might actually F it up, man. We believe it is essential that we participate in crafting a mutually acceptable communication to the identified individuals, the victims. The letter further proposed that the attorney representative for the victims be instructed that the details regarding the United States investigation of this matter and its resolution with Mr. Epstein is confidential. You may not make public statements regarding this matter. So we have Epstein's attorneys instructing the Department of Justice not to make any public statements about this agreement or about Mr. Epstein's crimes. Yeah, sit on that one for a second. Again, if you would have said to me that this kind of situation, based upon my interactions with the U.S. attorneys, I absolutely respect them, don't get me wrong. And they're pretty hardcore, right? They take it seriously. They take it really seriously. Like if you would have told me that this kind of situation occurred where a person's attorney, I don't care how priced they are, was like manhandling the U.S. attorney's office like this, I would have never believed it. I would have never believed it. And so again, this tells me that it has nothing to do exactly with how rich and well resourced Epstein was, but has everything to do with whatever political elite power people he had behind him were absolutely pushing these buttons. And I think we could probably come together and figure out generally the neighborhood of who those people are or what type of those people are, right? Just saying. Um, Here we go. Here's another one. I've conferenced with U.S. attorneys a bunch of times on Zoom, telephone, with judge stuff. Not once have I ever had a meal with them. I mean, and that's not to say I would. Don't get me wrong. It's not like if they were like, "Hey, let's go grab a bite to me," I'd be like, "F you." But it's just that's a little bit rare. That's for sure a little bit rare. But here we have the lead U.S. attorney at that time, Acosta, from my understanding, at the Southern District of Florida in that office. Follows up with an email after he had breakfast with Epstein's attorney saying, "I also want to thank you for the commitment you made to me during our October 12th meeting in which you," and again, this is the breakfast meeting, "in which you assured me that your office, the DOJ, would not contact any of the identified individuals, the victims, potential witnesses, or potential civil claimants and their respective counsel in this matter." Because what's on the line, and I'm going to say it over and over. What was on the line? The potential that actual justice be done. The potential that actual justice be done against Epstein. That is what was on the line, and that is what they worked very hard not to fuck up. Okay? Pardon my language. In late October 2007, agents from the FBI met with a few of the victims, and which is great. I mean, good. I'm glad something's going down. But hey, they couldn't have been straight up and down with these people. Come on now, there's a lot on the line. So they met with them. They met with a few of them, but only spoke generally about the non-prosecution agreement. Definitely not in any certain terms. And the victims later testified they certainly had no understanding of what the import or what the consequence of this non-prosecution agreement would be. And I mean, come on now, I'm sitting here over the course of days having to explain it to y'all, right? And I'm an attorney. The idea that some FBI agent would, even if they wanted to try to convey this to them, would be able to do so is stretching it a little bit. Now, some FBI agents are attorneys and stuff, so I'm not. Again, that's not to cut on the credibility or intelligence of any FBI agents per se, but I think you know what I'm saying. But in either instance, the victim's been very clear that in no way, shape, or form did they fully explain what this was. It was just generally spoken about. Okay. And so, despite the fact that these agents went and tried some way to fill their statutory duty, no. Epstein's attorneys complained about it in an email. They complained, what are these agents doing, going out there saying anything to these victims about this agreement that we've already reached? Right? What are they doing? What are they doing? Because they might fuck it up. They very well might fuck it up. And I would imagine that the FBI agents were probably very much wanting to go tell these victims what's up. And to the extent they did understand the import, I'm sure they probably were not. I mean, I would have to imagine if they have any kind of moral compass or understanding of fundamental justice and fair play, would have been chomping at the bits to go tell these victims what's up, But no. I mean, look, Epstein's attorneys told him no, don't do that. So next, the dispute. Okay, so the dispute kind of switched from notifying the victims, okay, to whether the victims would be entitled to notice of this. So the dispute in the emails, because the non-prosecution agreement had already been executed. The next phase of obfuscation, okay, as I've been saying, was because the non-prosecution agreement was reached apparently before the state plea bargain was entered, okay? And so now that the non-prosecution agreement is reached, we got to make sure these victims do not show up to this state court sentencing hearing to potentially fuck this up, Okay, so the emails and the controversy between the two, or they're really working the conspiracy at that point, switched to making sure that these victims did not get notice of the state court proceedings, so that way they could not in any way mess this up. Um, and so yeah, so anyways, under the law, under federal law, these victims were entitled to know about the state court proceeding, and they were entitled to know that they had an opportunity to show up to that proceeding and object or make a victim statement or just generally make themselves known to the state court judge before approving this plea bargain. And the court would have gladly accepted them in the court and taken their testimony. Absolutely. Um, So yeah, so that's why they didn't want them coming there. And I've been saying that, but just the other, because that's one of the most heinous things to me too. It's like, not only did they not tell them about they're not going to prosecute Epstein, but they went through great lengths to ensure that the only meaningful input at that point that they might have in this whole situation showing up to this state sentencing hearing, they went through great lengths to ensure that that would not be a possibility because they would not be aware of it, at least through them. Okay. When given notice of the DOJ's intention to provide notice of the state sentencing hearing, Epstein's counsel sent an email to the DOJ objecting to the proposed letters, okay, to tell them about this hearing, and stated that such would be inappropriate. These letters notifying them of the state proceeding would be inappropriate. Before Jeffrey Epstein was sentenced for the state charges. The attorney went on to say the victims should not be contacted or told to do anything other than to basically shut the fuck up. And those aren't the exact words, but basically shut the fuck up and collect whatever money they could in the civil suits. Basically, their attitude was, who gives two shits how you feel about what Mr. Epstein did with you? We're going to pay you money because that's what makes the world go around, right? And so with that being said, you just sit down and shut up till we're done, and then we'll pay you and go on about your business. That's the attitude that these people had. And I don't see much correction in that attitude on the part of the Department of Justice in this instance. These are the people that we're dealing with. Like I say, what we're seeing today with the Epstein file release is symptomatic of a fucking sick lineage. Okay. And tradition within the Department of Justice as it relates to these elite billionaire PDF files. Okay. Later in December, the lead U.S. attorney, Acosta, sent a letter to Epstein's counsel stating that the DOJ intended to provide notice to victims of the federal government. Sorry about that. To provide notice of the victims. Okay, so they were going to provide notice to the victims of the non-prosecution agreement, but they were not going to provide notice to them of the state court proceeding. They were going to leave that up to the state prosecutors whether they wanted to invite these people and give them notice of that sentencing hearing at the state court. So after that, January 2nd, or in January, the two victims that were part of this suit were sent a very misleading letter by the FBI. And this letter stated that the case is currently under investigation, okay, which we now know, right? They signed the non-prosecution agreement back in September. Now, can I say that they for sure had ended their investigation? I mean, how are we even defining what an investigation is? But I think it's fair to say that the way that they wrote this in this letter, saying they were still investigating in the context, was absolutely fucking misleading, okay? But said that, they wrote them this stating, this case is currently under investigation. This can be a lengthy process, and we request your continued patience while we conduct a thorough investigation. The letter said nothing about the already executed non-prosecution agreement or that the same had a binding effect on whether they could press federal charges. Okay. So, and to me, that's almost worse, right? That's almost fucking worse. It's like, not giving them notice or just leaving them in the dark is better than actively going out there and misleading them. But let's be real. Let's be honest, y'all. Why did they go out there and intentionally mislead them? Well, it's real simple. Because if they felt assured that this was being appropriately handled and investigated by the federal government, they wouldn't take it upon themselves to maybe go and check the court's docket or maybe call the state, see what's going on, things of that nature. It was done, in my opinion, it was done to put them and lull them into a false sense of security as to whether they would actually see justice against their attacker, against their perpetrator. You know, it's just sick, man. It's just sick. I can't believe it. Like, well, I can believe it. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't that way, huh? You know. Um, I go on. The two victims, again, these are the two victims that out of the 34 plus that, later filed suit in 2019 for not getting notice, what we've been, talking about. But these two victims in 2019 in the suit, they stated that they believed the prosecution of Epstein was important. Okay, so this is how they felt. They felt that it was important and they wanted to be consulted before any resolution. I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable, right? I think that's pretty reasonable. If you're a minor victim getting, sexually assaulted by an adult, PDF file, old man, relatively speaking, yeah, I think, feeling it important to be notified of what's going on there, yeah, I think that was probably pretty fucking important to them. Unfortunately, it was important to them, but it just wasn't important to the DOJ. And, Congress passed this law. Apparently it was important to them, but it wasn't important for the DOJ, Yeah. And I mean, the way it looks, I mean, from what I see, both within the realm of what we've been discussing and seeing today and things I've seen outside of these scenarios is the DOJ does whatever the fuck they want. Comply with the law. Why? Who's going to hold them accountable? You see what I mean? Who's going to hold them accountable? Lest I digress. In March of 2008, the DOJ sent an email to a prospective civil attorney, right? So remember, I told you this non-prosecution agreement set up a structure whereby Epstein would pay to have a civil attorney appointed to represent these victims in the course of civil proceedings and would oversee basically them getting appropriately compensated, but not too compensated. They definitely clipped it there. Not too compensated. Okay. But anyways, the DOJ sent an email. The DOJ was working to identify this individual that they wanted to represent the victims. And again, in this email, even though this and do you think this might be important for this attorney? To know that this non-prosecution agreement had been signed all the way back in September 2007. You think that might have been important to them to understand? Were they notified at that time? And this is March 2008. This is, probably 7 months, 6, 7 months after the agreement. Still not notified. Left completely in the dark. And in May 2008, here's funny. All right. So this agreement, the non-prosecution agreement, I think covered like 34 known victims. It was signed in 2007, September 2007. Well, here we go. In May 2008, yet another victim of Epstein was identified. And they as well were not told about the non-prosecution agreement, although that non-prosecution agreement apparently affected their rights as well. Okay. Affected their rights as well. Not told about it. No. All they think is that, oh, the FBI, the government, DOJ, they got my back. They're going to go get him. They're going to do what's right. And all none the wiser that they had no intention of doing that. As a matter of fact, they had already not done that, Anyways, here we go. In mid-June 2008, an attorney for the two victims, again, these civil victims in this lawsuit we're reading from, contacted the Department of Justice and was told that federal charges were a future possibility. All right. Straight bold-faced lie. Was a future possibility, despite the fact that the non-prosecution agreement had been signed. So again, they didn't tell them about the agreement. They definitely didn't tell them about the agreement. They told them opposite, that there was still some kind of hope in the future that, prospect that federal charges would be filed. Yeah. So then there was a weird email. I'm not sure what this is, but here's why it was weird, because we've really painted a picture of the way that these conversations were going, where the DOJ was being really, really accommodating. I guess that's even a very accommodating term, or, a very generous term to put on it. But apparently some email came through. I guess Epstein was doing something pretty crazy, not complying with the terms of the agreement. So in June 23rd, 2008, the Department of Justice sent an email to his counsel stating that the Deputy Attorney General, so this would be Todd Blanche's role, whoever was in that role, had sent an email and determined that prosecution of Epstein was appropriate and demanded that terms of the non-prosecution agreement. Again, what is going on here? Like it just defies all normal, decent standards in the practice of law, particularly with prosecutors, particularly federal prosecutors. I mean, what the hell is going on here? It's a lot to unpack. It really is. And again, it's what we're seeing today is a result of this system, of these acts. What we're reading about today in a large part led to this whole thing with the Epstein, with the files, with the release, with the international pedo ring, all that. Like, it really, really caught steam and picked up here because they didn't do nothing to him. Right? Whenever you have 34 minor victims willing to come to court and testify against you and you get off like that, how empowered do you think he felt? Well, hey, we don't have to wonder, we saw, right? And we're seeing in the files how empowered. And let's be honest, do you think it just empowered him? Oh, no, 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 no. It empowered all of these very rich and powerful people, these elites. I'd be interested to look at like how many people were because, a lot of these elites want to say that, oh, once we knew about the charges, we were very careful and we just had limited contact. I wouldn't be surprised if the reality was with a lot of those people that when they figured out that Epstein got away with a slap on the wrist, that didn't further embolden them to go and hang out and do Epstein's bidding with him. Let me know what you think about that. I mean, do you think that might have actually empowered some of these people to get further involved, knowing that this man had 34 victims? Again, I would assume willing to come testify against him, I more or less walked away scot-free in relative terms, relatively speaking. And then on June 27, 2008, the DOJ sent an email to attorney for the victims and notified that Epstein. So on June 27, 2008, they finally got notice that Epstein had pled guilty right after the fact. They had to make sure this happened after the fact. They were then notified that he had pled guilty to state charges of solicitation or prostitution. But again, even then, they did not say anything about the non-prosecution agreement or that the state plea took care of any potential federal crimes. And they were also not informed. I'll take that back. That was read out of place there. But anyways, yeah. So they, again, were notified that, hey, he pled out to get that he's guilty. But again, did not let them know at that time that because he did that, he fulfilled at least some of this non-prosecution agreement, that he would not be federal level. They left these people completely in the dark. Yeah. So towards the end here, I guess I'll just summarize. Let me one thing I wanted to point out. And this was a little bit confusing to me, admittedly, ladies and gentlemen. There's a part in this opinion. It says, and I'll just read it because maybe y'all can help me kind of make sense of what this is getting at. But it says on July 3rd, 2008, as specifically directed by the office. And so I'm going to say normally in this, the way the office has been referring in this opinion has been to the DOJ. So it says as specifically directed by the office, blank, it's redacted, sent a letter to the office. So it's like apparently the DOJ directed somebody to send a letter to the office, to the DOJ, communicating the wishes of so maybe it was a victim attorney. So the office directed a victim's attorney to send a letter to the office, to the DOJ, communicating the wishes of Jane Doe 1, 2, and Jane Doe 5 that federal charges be filed against Epstein. And here's what this letter said. It said, "We urge the Attorney General and our United States Attorney to consider the fundamental import of the vigorous enforcement of our federal laws. We urge you to move forward with the traditional indictments and criminal prosecution commensurate with the crimes Mr. Epstein has committed. And we further urge you to take the steps necessary to protect our children from this very dangerous sexual predator. I say it fell on deaf ears, but I mean, that would be implying that these people in the DOJ didn't already know what this was, right? They deal with this. They knew exactly what Epstein was. They absolutely did. I commend the attorney for sending the letter. Apparently, DOJ instructed them to. I commend them for it, but unfortunately, these people were very well aware of what they were dealing with, and there's no other way, in my opinion, to really look at this. Let's see, Moonchild Blues. Greg, if it can be demonstrated that prosecutors were criminally negligent, could they be held responsible for subsequent crimes committed by Epstein? That's a very good question. Let me say this, is that obviously in terms of, their prosecutors generally have what's called qualified immunity and very, very strong qualified immunity for acts or omissions that they, do in the scope of them being a prosecutor. Again, it's not 100%. There's some holes here and there. So I guess I'll say this. That's a very good question. Let me look into that. Let me ponder on that. But I'll just say this. I think them personally, yeah, they're entitled to a bit of to pretty strong qualified immunity. There are ways around it because that's such a good question, and I think that y'all would really appreciate maybe an episode or some content discussing that. I will surely go look at the standard, and we can have an episode just discussing that, whether that's a possibility. I'll just say before we do, don't be upset if the conclusion comes to no, because it's, for prosecutors and judges, for sure, the qualified immunity is very, very strong. Very few instances where, you can go after them for that. Well, at least as it relates to monetary damage. And now you're saying criminally negligent. Are you saying like in terms of being prosecuted criminally versus, because I'm sorry, when I said that, I was thinking about civil liability. Criminal liability, that's a very good question. One that I haven't really ran down in my mind before too much. Let me look into that. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm gonna write it down. Criminal liability. And one other thing I'll say about it too, y'all, and this is also, we also have to consider, well, who would bring the charges? Because let's as of late, we've seen a lot of political prosecutions with Trump and Biden administration officials going back and forth, and as we've seen, it usually ends up pretty much fucking nowhere. It pretty much ends up nowhere. And so even in the instance that they could be held criminally liable, just the prospects of them even filing or going to a grand jury to get an indictment are pretty far-fetched, unfortunately. And then even further, whether they would even go through with it past that point is still very, very questionable. But I want to say in that, absolutely, if there were things that they did that were criminal, and I mean, I'll say, and tomorrow we're going to talk about, what the judge found in terms of, these prosecutors violating the rights, of these victims. So in a way that is illegal. Now, I don't think that this act probably has criminal punitive provisions baked into it. I'll definitely look. But again, I mean, and I'll tell you, theoretically, the prosecutors and these people do illegal stuff all the time. Unfortunately, a lot of the illegal things that they do don't have criminal penalties attached to it, right? Obviously, people can assert their civil rights, sue them, personally for that. But as far as criminal liability, probably not. So, but no, great question. That's a fucking great question. I mean, and I can get it because if you're like me, this really feels almost just as much criminal as what Epstein did. And in a way, it is, right? Because by not doing their job appropriately, they what do they call it when you ah they enabled Epstein, and I don't think this is a stretch. By their actions, what they did was enable Epstein, and as I was saying not too long ago, and his people, his other co-conspirators, these billionaires. I think that they absolutely enabled and empowered them to not only continue doing what they're doing, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was ratcheted up and got even more depraved. I mean, I don't know that, but I would imagine if what they had been doing, these, because really the Palm Beach thing revolved around allegedly him getting these massages by minors. As the judge said, some of them, they all involved inappropriate touching and him being naked. Some ended up with sexual encounters, some didn't. But that was basically kind of the rubric for my understanding of the 2007 case, right? But now, when we look at these files that are being released now, the stuff that transpired subsequent to it seemed to be much more depraved than what is described in this 2007 opinion. So, look, I'm good with chalking it up and setting that one on the DOJ's lap for, not that they did it, obviously, but almost equal responsibility for what happened, right? So, anyways, the rest of the opinion really just goes, and there's not much of it left. But anyways, there was a real battle to prevent this non-prosecution agreement from getting to these victims. It finally got to them, but way too late at that time for them to do anything as far as reneging the prosecution. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so again, because their rights were violated in 2019, these victims went and sued the DOJ. And, I would imagine that suit against the DOJ was probably what I'm going to consider a public interest lawsuit, meaning that I would imagine that they did that to bring this to light. And to, yeah, I would imagine that a large impetus for that lawsuit was simply just, and here we are. We never even heard nothing about it. I didn't until I looked at the damn Epstein files. So I will go back on Pacer and look at this suit and see if I can find this opinion in order unredacted to see if the actual names of some of the redacted names are in there. And then tomorrow we'll touch upon, we won't spend tomorrow the whole episode going into this per se, but we will spend the first, maybe third, talking about how the court, the opinion and the basis for it and kind of what this means in terms of what we're seeing now with the treatment of victims. And then we'll move on and mix it up, start looking at something else for a little bit. So yeah, absolutely. Let me think. Podcast studio still coming along. It's actually sort of in the finishing stages, kind of now, walls being painted, stuff like that. So we're moving towards completion there. Okay. So yeah, so this evening I'm going to publish a video. As I spoke yesterday, yeah, that, Jesse on Fire and some other content creators seemingly are going towards the mindset that, Kirk is still with us. Okay. And obviously I published that Hunter Kozak video the other day and supported Jesse. But I have a piece of a documentary that's very, very indicative of, there's a certain intelligence service that we think potentially could be behind, the whole thing. And this documentary actually has them bragging about certain capabilities that they have that plays into the idea that they might have been able to coordinate that whole thing, right, without an actual unaliving event going down. Okay. So stay tuned for that. Let me think. And I'm going to start doing polls soon. I'm going to start doing some polls. I got a few things I want to poll y'all on. And so, yeah, and we crossed the threshold of 900 subscribers since I've been here last. So I am so grateful for that. I can't express it deep enough. My gratitude. So thank y'all. I've got some incredible subscribers. I enjoy answering comments. We have productive conversations in the comments. I get all kinds of new cool information in the comments. And moreover, y'all are kind to one another. And, it's incredible. Thank y'all. I love the energy. I look forward to doing this, and it's because of y'all. So thank you. So yeah, let me go to the comments now and see what I can answer for y'all. And yeah. Said I will be here. So hard of a topic to talk about. It is hard, y'all. And I'll just let y'all know. Like yesterday, I felt a little guilty. I hate to be the reason why people are brought to anger or really any kind of not good positive emotional state. I hate to be the person that brings people into that frequency and vibration. So I just want y'all to know that that is my intention with this. And that's why with me expressing as I have the last two, that's why I kind of don't like to do it a whole lot, because I think that also contributes to bringing you into that state or that frequency. But I have to balance that against we might need to be in that frequency a bit now. It seems to have gotten pretty far out of hand, and we've avoided having to really go down this road for a long time. Not that we actively avoided; it was really hid from us. But now that we must, I think that it's going to be a bit healthy to get in our feelings a little bit about this, right? Especially to the extent that motivates us to go to the polls. Do whatever we can within our civic duties and responsibilities and rights to effectuate the positive change. And more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we need to be the positive change that we want to see in the world. We really do. And, watching the highly divisive shit show Super Bowl or being made aware of it today really brought that to light too. I just know that these things are being intentionally done in a very divisive way. And we see every day in the news, on YouTube, these things, the corrosive effects. So yeah, these are hard conversations. It sucks. I hate talking trash about other attorneys like that, the DOJ. I mean, I do. That doesn't make me feel good, but it makes me feel worse, right? To know what happened. And to know the victims that the body count he had victim wise, after this, and to think, could this have been prevented? And again, it's all speculation. Hindsight's always 20/20, but I feel pretty damn strongly that had Epstein been in prison, sure, maybe he would have gotten out later at some time. I don't know if he would have physically survived prison had he gone on those types of charges, to be quite honest with you. Susan, not holding your breath on anyone being held accountable. Yeah, I wouldn't tell you to hold your breath. Hold your hope. Don't hold your breath. Okay. I just watched takes on Super Bowl. No hell was watching. Yeah, thank y'all. Yeah, if y'all can hit the like button, any kind of support, likes, all that. I guess any kind of noise down there for the algorithm, very much appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed, also very much appreciated. We are growing slowly. I'm very, very happy about that. So thank y'all for everything. Yeah. Yeah, they do want Lisette. They do. They want us. Division was most definitely the purpose. Yeah, man. Oh, thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. And I saw your emails. I was able to respond to them this morning. So thank you for sending those. And once I get some extra time, I would be love to follow up in that direction. So thank you. I know for a fact the halftime show was done by Russia. I don't know who picked the artist, right? I mean, look. They're an artist, and I know that they're very popular and stuff. And just so y'all know, me personally, I could give two shits. But I do realize that people, and surely they did too, know that that was going to be an offensive pick. And just the way I was kind of thinking about it is that I have a hard time believing that your average everyday NFL fan, when they click on the radio to listen to music, that would be the one. Now, I don't think Kid Rock was either, quite honestly, right? But you see what I'm saying? It's it seems it was intentionally picked. That they came to pick the most. These a lot of these people, they want to irritate the president. who gives a shit? Like, he seems to be irritated almost every damn day, regardless. Like, picking, and I'm not saying they did it for this, but it just seemed like a lot of the, at least maybe that's the whole charade that they're playing in front of us. But it seems that like a lot of the people, like, in not the Zionist controlled media, I guess, want to like poke shots at Trump and do things to upset him, stuff. I don't know. It's all senseless to me and very childlike. Cash has perjured Elena. Hey, Elena. Cash has perjured himself so many times, including his confirmation hearing. He's a joke. I mean, when I heard him say that there's no credible evidence that Jeffrey Epstein ever trafficked co-conspirators. So, when I heard him say that, one, I knew he was lying through his teeth, but, you always think, well, he must have some kind of fallback position, that, if you read the emails, you can't ever say for sure that any of this is a credible or actual crime and stuff. And I figured he might be falling back on that. But when I saw this opinion and that this had already been decided for him, right? This has already been decided for Cash. I knew then, I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely, if someone decides and has the power to go hold him accountable, he's cooked. He's cooked, in my opinion. How can those Florida attorneys live with themselves? I mean, and remember what I read yesterday where they're like, oh, for reasons I won't put in writing. So they knew, right? They knew what they were doing was completely fucked up. They absolutely knew. So it's, again, in a perfect world, ideal world, were under extreme duress. But I think in the most likely world, they were trying to get a promotion or got paid under the table. Something like that would be the usual culprits in situations like this. Because, I mean, sure, if you're rich and you can buy the best attorneys, I have no doubt that Epstein probably had the best attorneys, working for him. I think Kenneth Starr was working for him. But even at the end of the day, that can only do you so much, right? Especially if you're talking about pleading out, right? In a plea bargain, having a high-paid attorney can really only go so far. This went way beyond what even the best attorney could do. When you got 34 something witnesses, minor victim witnesses, and you're getting basically probation, a slap on the wrist. Yeah, that transcends, Johnny Cochran being your fucking attorney, 100%. Knowing what they were up against, Florida attorneys were probably proud they got him into a jail cell. The whole thing is so sad. Yeah, I mean, in that way too, again, we don't know what forces that these attorneys were fighting, and certainly they were probably fighting them internally and externally, within and outside of the DOJ. I would say, I think if you were to catch them on any normal day outside the office, maybe at the golf course, and ask them if they thought Epstein should have done more time, they obviously would probably tell you. I mean, I would hope so. They tell you, yeah, but then they'd probably go into a whole tirade of some bullshit as to, excuse after excuse as to why it didn't happen. So you had a cousin work for the DOJ, Miss Susan? That's interesting. Yeah, I don't blame him. Yeah. And like I said yesterday, they, because at the end of the day, as adults, we can get up and walk the fuck out of the office, right? We can get up and walk out if we're being instructed to do something which offends us morally, and we don't feel spiritually in alignment with that. Obviously, they did. I mean, to our knowledge, they didn't. I mean, we might figure out that some of these attorneys did, but it seems like the same prosecutor, which they didn't name in the pleadings, they say just line prosecutor, the line prosecutor. They don't put their name in there. Why is that? Because it's completely embarrassing and heinous what eventually came out of that. Yeah, Lisette, it's scary how little they care about justice when it's not in their interest, and that transcends this case. Okay, that transcends this case, right?
that transcends this case. There is many instances that we could point to where we could say the DOJ doesn't give two shits about justice, or especially equal justice. As a matter of fact, I started writing a small speech for y'all last night about equal justice and what this whole thing tells us about equal justice. And yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to write a speech, maybe a 10, 15-minute, 20-minute speech on equal justice, and do a live stream with it for y'all. Let me know in the comments if y'all think that'd be something you'd want to hear. Because yeah, it's PDF file should never get a plea deal. I mean, if you are a PDF file and you have a victim that is willing to come and testify against you at trial, and you're not wanting to go to trial, and you're going to get a plea deal, well, then it should be 1 year minus the max or something like that, right? Like it should be, some 1 year a time or something, just acknowledgement that you're not going to waste all the time and resources of the department in getting a conviction. Yeah, sure, they should get some kind of condolence for that. But other than that, it should never be what we saw here. Nowhere even in the universe of what we saw here. It's gross, man. And okay, so Lisette's pointing out that she thinks generally she sees that PDF files get lower sentences than she believes that they should. And I think, I haven't like kept up with a lot of them per se, but if my memory serves me correctly, there's been a few times at least where I'm like, come on now. And, these people are notorious reoffenders too. And not to categorize all of them, to the extent that people have done who rehabilitate themselves and actually do better, I don't want to rain on them. I'm always about giving people second chances, improving their lives. But unfortunately with this one, right, with these kind of sexual impulses, it's very difficult to really overcome those things from my understanding. And so, yeah, with that being said, there probably should be a larger amount of time for them to have to go sit and really distance themselves from that to get it sorted out. Let's see. Elena, there's little honor or integrity left at any level of our government. I don't know how to fix it. I tend to agree. The one way we can fix it's at the ballot box. But let me tell you, let's go back to the divisive ass Super Bowl, right? What are they doing? They're trying to ensure that we can't get it together to come together to go to that ballot box and agree, regardless of a political affiliation, on some people with some fucking moral values to come represent us. Like, I don't even care how fucking competent they are anymore, for real. Like, do you have a conscience and a moral compass? And are you willing to grow a fucking spine and stick up for that in office? Those are the people I want representing us. And, I'll just throw this out there, and I might do an episode on this, but wouldn't it be cool for the first time ever in our history to have what I'm saying is a Massey Kana ticket? Could you imagine like a Massey Kana president, Massey president, Kana vice president, both sides of the aisle coming together? Now, again, I haven't done a ton of research on them otherwise, so just please excuse that. But I can just say that with their handling of this Epstein matter so far, I mean, it just looks like they're one of the only ones that have a fucking moral compass and are dedicated to doing the right thing. I mean, they're committed, and I think soon will be going to the DOJ with their staff to go look at the unredacted documents, And to me, that's a pretty good commitment, pretty firm commitment as a congressman to commit to that, and hopefully they go do it. And I'll say that Thomas Massey is also committed to reading the perpetrator names on the House floor if the DOJ fails to release them. So, again, just thinking like maybe a split ticket come together for one time. I mean, can it hurt? I mean, I think if we've seen we're this two-party dualistic, polarized, highly fucking polarized system has kept us way out in the weeds, while these people are doing what we're now learning that they've been doing. No good. Hoaxing the world. I got knocked off YouTube and Facebook all the time. I was part of a class action suit. I got the max around $31. Yeah, those class actions, it's usually the lawyers that clean house with that. by the time the attorney fees and expenses are cut out, it's like, in almost every class action, less than $100 or something for victims. It's crazy. When elections don't work, we're not left with good options. I mean, that's kind of the most, fundamental option, I guess you would say, kind of the foundational option in the Constitution. Obviously, you have the ability for Congress to impeach officials and things like that. So, yeah, there's not a lot of options. But again, the best thing we can do right now, in my opinion, is really, and I say that, y'all, just if you're going to go vote in midterms, like really just make a commitment to step back for a second and not look at these two candidates in terms of all the divisive issues, right, that might be influencing the vote otherwise. Like really look to see who you think is a good and decent moral human being, and use the best of your discernment to try to pick someone that you think is going to actually have integrity and do the right thing. Let's see. Damn, I have to go. Elena, she had to get out of here, so I hope she had a good one. I'd love to hear from the parents. Sorry, I don't know the context of what parents you're talking about there, Susan. I Can't Breathe gets millions, gold casket, and weeks of attention in riots. That's where we're at, man. Okay, and then Moonchild, I answered that one about the criminal liability. Oh my God, they let Jeffries go on vacation, waiting around for a week to hear from him. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they more or less accommodated his the vacation there, or at least it was his attorney's vacation or something. But yeah, they definitely didn't give notice to the victims because they needed to wait around for them to get off vacation to look at the letter to make sure it was okay for them to notify the victims in that way. It's just totally heinous, man. I don't know any other way to really characterize it. I really don't know of any other way to characterize it. But yeah, we're at 111. That's a good. I love angel numbers. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping it up here. Thank you guys. Much love. Thank you for the support. I'll post probably another video with my documentary clip I wanted to put out there this evening. I'll probably film that and post it this evening. So anyways, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, beautiful people. This is not only a high IQ outfit, but a very good-hearted and good-spirited outfit. And I like that. And, I think when we're putting out that kind of energy, we're naturally going to attract our tribe here. And, I hope that people who come here are like me and seemingly y'all too, like a commitment to being apolitical, a commitment to not buying into all the divisive bullshit that's being constantly shoved down our throats, because that's how they keep our eye off the ball. That's the ultimate magic trick for these people. They fuck with your emotions. So that way they can fuck with your money and fuck with your property and your children and all that too, really. So anyways, much love, everybody. Thank y'all very much. We'll be back tomorrow, probably at the same time, right about 4 seems to be a good, decent, sweet spot. And yeah, much love. Y'all have a good one. Peace. Oh, and I'll holler at y'all in the comments. Much love.